They are making me more like I ought to be. This was a long thought to think, and George looked very serious while she was thinking it. Julian looked up and caught her blue eyes fixed on him. He smiled. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "They're not worth a penny," said George, going red. "I was just thinking how nice you all are, and how I wished I could be like you." "You're an awfully nice person," said Julian, surprisingly. "You can't help being an only child. They're always a bit queer, you know, unless they're mighty careful." "You're a most interesting person, I think." George flushed red again, and felt pleased. "Let's go and take Timothy for a walk," she said. "He'll be wondering what's happened to us today." They all went off together, and Timothy greeted them at the top of his voice. They told him all about their plans for the next day, and he wagged his tail and looked up at them out of his soft brown eyes as if he understood every single word they said. "He must feel pleased to think he's going to be with us for 2 or 3 days, said Anne. It was very exciting the next morning, setting off in the boat with all their things packed neatly at one end. Julian checked them all by reading out aloud from his list. It didn't seem as if they had forgotten anything. "Got the map?" said Dick, suddenly. Julian nodded. "I put on clean jeans this morning," he said, "but you may be sure I remembered to pop the map into my pocket." "Here it is." He took it out, and the wind at once blew it right out of his hands. It fell into the sea and bobbed there in the wind. All 4 children gave a cry of utter dismay. "Their precious map! Quick! Row after it!" cried George, and swung the boat round. But someone was quicker than she was. Tim had seen the paper fly from Julian's hand, and had heard and understood the cries of dismay. With an enormous splash he leapt into the water and swam valiantly after the map. He could swim well for a dog, for he was strong and powerful. He soon had the map in his mouth and was swimming back to the boat. The children thought he was simply marvelous. George hauled him into the boat and took the map from his mouth. There was hardly the mark of his teeth on it. He had carried it so carefully. It was wet, and the children looked anxiously at it to see if the tracing had been spoiled. But Julian had traced it very strongly, and it was quite all right. He placed it on a seat to dry, and told Dick to hold it there in the sun. That was a narrow squeak, he said, and the others agreed. George took the oars again, and they set off once more to the island, getting a perfect shower bath from Timothy when he stood up and shook his wet coat. He was given a big biscuit as a reward, and crunched it up with great enjoyment. George made her way through the reefs of rocks with a sure hand. It was marvelous to the others how she could slide the boat in between the dangerous rocks and never get a scratch. They thought she was really wonderful. She brought them safely to the little inlet, and they jumped out onto the sand. They pulled the boat high up, in case the tide came far up the tiny cove, and then began to unload their goods. "We'll carry all the things to that little stone room," said Julian. "They will be safe there and won't get wet if it rains." "I hope nobody comes to the island while we are here, George." "I shouldn't think they would," said George. "Father said it would be about a week before the deeds were signed, making over the island to that man." "It won't be his till then." "We've got a week, anyhow." "Well, we don't need to keep a watch in case anyone else arrives then," said Julian, who had half thought that it would be a good idea to make someone stay on guard at the inlet, to give a warning to the others in case anyone else arrived. "Come on. You take the spades, Dick. I'll take the food and drink with George. And Anne can take the little things." The food and drink were in a big box, for the children did not mean to starve while they were on the island. They had brought loaves of bread, butter, biscuits, jam, tins of fruit, ripe plums, bottles of ginger beer, a kettle to make tea, and anything else they could think of. George and Julian staggered up the cliff with the heavy box. They had to put it down once or twice to give themselves a rest.